My hands were steady. That was the part that surprised me most. I'd spent 11 years building something from nothing. Long nights in a converted garage, missed holidays, a marriage I kept trying to save even when I could feel it slipping through my fingers like sand. And the night it all came together, the night I finally sold my company for $22 million, my hands were completely, perfectly steady. My husband's were not. I noticed it when he poured the champagne. We were in the ballroom of the Fairmont in downtown Chicago. My attorney had booked the private room for 30 guests, family and close colleagues, people who'd actually watched me build Halcyon Diagnostics from a spare bedroom and a business loan I'd taken out against my own credit. The room smelled like gardenias and warm bread. My daughter, who was 9, was sitting at the kids' table with my brother's kids, already half asleep against her cousin's shoulder. It was the kind of night I'd imagined 100 times. And then I looked across the room and watched my husband pour 2 glasses of champagne, turn his back just slightly, just enough, and slip something from his jacket pocket into the left one. He didn't see me watching. He was looking toward the window, toward the city lights, the way he always did when he thought no one was paying attention to him. That little turn of the shoulder, I'd loved that once. I used to think it meant he was thoughtful, that he was always half inside some private world. Now I understood it differently. My first thought, standing there in a dress I'd bought for this exact night, was, what kind? Fast acting or slow? Something meant to look like a cardiac event? I was 41 and healthy, but these things happened. Grief was already being arranged somewhere in his mind. I was certain of it. The sad young widower with a 9-year-old daughter and a $22 million inheritance. I could see the whole architecture of it in the 2 seconds it took him to slide the glass slightly to the left. My second thought was, don't let your face change. I crossed the room slowly. My attorney, a woman named Heloise who has known me since law school, caught my eye from across the room and raised her glass. I smiled at her. I stopped to hug my brother. I picked up a shrimp from the appetizer table and ate it, and then I made my way to my husband, who handed me the left glass with a smile so warm and so practiced that I almost doubted myself. Almost. To you, he said, everything you've built. To us, I said. And I clinked my glass against his. But I didn't drink. I kept that glass in my hand for the next 40 minutes. I gave a small speech. I thanked my team, my investors, my brother who'd driven me to the bank the morning I signed my first lease. I thanked my daughter, who was now fully asleep in her chair with a cloth napkin tucked over her like a blanket. I mentioned my husband last, because I was still a good person, or trying to be, and said he'd stood by me through the hard years. He stood up and mouthed "I love you" from across the room. I turned back to my guests and kept talking. At some point near the end of the evening, my mother-in-law came to stand beside me near the bar. She was a woman who had never once made me feel welcome in her son's family, who had called my company Naomi's Little Project at Thanksgiving for 3 years running, who had once told my daughter in front of me that it was a shame her mother worked so much. I had spent a decade biting my tongue around this woman. She reached past me toward the bar, and I watched her hand close around my glass, the one I'd been holding, the one I hadn't touched. I could have stopped her, I know that. I've thought about it every day since. I could have knocked it over, could have said that one's mine, could have grabbed her wrist. I didn't. My hand stayed at my side. My brain said, let it go, you don't even know what's in it. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe you imagined the whole thing. She drank. 15 minutes later, she was on the floor. I called 911 before anyone else in the room had processed what was happening. I was already kneeling beside her, checking her pulse, calling her name. The paramedics arrived in 6 minutes. She was unconscious but breathing. They took her out on a stretcher while my daughter slept through the whole thing. My husband stood in the doorway of the ballroom and watched the stretcher go by, and his face, I will never forget this. His face did something strange. It wasn't grief, it wasn't even surprise. It was a very small recalibration, the look of someone solving a problem. I filed a police report that night. I didn't mention what I'd seen. Not yet. I told them my mother-in-law had collapsed, that I'd called 911 immediately, that I wanted a full toxicology screen run. The detective on duty, a woman who looked like she'd been on shift for 16 hours, wrote everything down and told me they'd be in touch. I drove myself home. My husband stayed at the hospital. The house felt different when I walked in. I stood in the kitchen for a long time with my coat still on, just breathing. My daughter was with my brother for the night. I was alone. I knew two things with certainty. The first was that I couldn't tell my husband I'd seen him. The second was that I needed to understand the full shape of what he'd been planning before I could do anything at all. So, I didn't confront him. I didn't change the locks or call a divorce attorney or throw his things into the yard. I made coffee, I went to bed, and the next morning I got up and started looking. The thing about building a company from scratch is that you learn to read numbers the way other people read faces. You notice when something doesn't track. I'd been half noticing things for about 8 months actually. Transfers I didn't remember authorizing, a second phone he'd gotten for work, a password changed on a shared account we'd had for years. I'd filed each one away under ask him about it later, because I was busy, because I was always busy, because I didn't want to be the kind of wife who checked up on her husband. I spent 4 days in my home office going through everything. He had been moving money for 14 months. Not large amounts at first. 3,000 here, 5,000 there, routed through an LLC he'd set up in Delaware that I'd never heard of. The company was called Vantage Forward Consulting. There was no website, there were no clients, there were only transfers, and then a larger account in Nevada, and then a wire to an account I couldn't immediately trace. I called Heloise. She came over that Saturday with her laptop and a bottle of sparkling water, and we sat at my kitchen table for 6 hours. By the end of it, we had a clear picture. My husband had moved approximately $340,000 out of accounts that were technically marital assets. He had also, at some point in the past 4 months, quietly consulted with a divorce attorney in Evanston, not in Chicago, where people might know me. And the preliminary paperwork suggested he intended to argue that Halcyon Diagnostics had been majority funded through a business account he'd co-signed early in our marriage, making him entitled to a significant share of the sale proceeds. He was going to divorce you, Heloise said. He was going to do more than that, I said. She looked at me. I told her what I'd seen at the Fairmont. Every detail, the pocket, the turn of the shoulder, the glass, his mother. Heloise is not a dramatic person. She set down her sparkling water very carefully and said, "Tell me you didn't drink from that glass." I didn't drink from it. She was quiet for a moment. Do you know what was in it? The toxicology screen had come back that morning. My mother-in-law was still in the hospital. The report listed a compound called gamma-hydroxybutyrate GHB. In a high enough dose, combined with the champagne, in a woman my age and weight, it would have caused respiratory depression. In the official language of the report, it was potentially life-threatening. His mother had a stronger constitution than either of us expected. She was going to be fine. I told Heloise what the toxicology report said. She picked up her phone and called a criminal defense attorney she trusted. Not for me, for strategy. We needed to understand exactly what I was sitting on before we handed anything to the police. Here's what I learned in the following 2 weeks. I had evidence of financial fraud. I had indirectly evidence of attempted poisoning, though making that case would require proving intent, proving he'd put it there, and ideally, finding where he'd obtained it. I had a mother-in-law in the hospital who did not yet know that her son had been the one to put her there. And I had a husband who was, every single day, coming home and eating dinner with me and asking how my day was and giving every appearance of a man whose plan had simply been delayed. I was going to give him the rope to hang himself. The financial investigator Heloise brought in found the Nevada account within 10 days. It was registered to a woman I'd never heard of, early 30s, worked in real estate, lived in Scottsdale. When I saw her name, the last small part of me that had been holding out for some innocent explanation went quiet. I didn't cry. I want to be honest about that. I sat with the folder in my hands and I felt something cold and clarifying move through me. And then I got up and made dinner for my daughter like it was any other Tuesday. My husband came home at 6:30. He'd brought flowers. "I've been thinking," he said, setting them on the counter. "We should take a real vacation. Just the three of us. Italy, maybe." "I'd love that," I said. I handed him a plate. 2 days later, I gave him something to find. I left my laptop open on the kitchen table with a document visible on the screen. A fake wire transfer summary I'd had Heloise mock up. It showed a $4.2 million transfer into a personal account in my name only, post-sale, structured in a way that would look, to someone trying to make a legal case for marital asset splitting, like I was hiding money. He thought he was smarter than me. That had always been his most expensive mistake. I set up a small camera in the kitchen, legal in Illinois for one-party recording in your own home, and went to take my daughter to her soccer practice. When I came back, the document had been photographed. I could see it in the slight displacement of the laptop. The angle of the screen changed just enough. He'd stood right where I'd hoped he would stand. More importantly, he'd made 2 phone calls from his second phone in the 40 minutes I was gone. Heloise's investigator pulled the records. One was to his attorney in Evanston. One was to the woman in Scottsdale. We had him. I want to be clear about the sequence of what happened next, because I've had to explain it several times and the order matters. I went to the police first. I brought Heloise, I brought the toxicology report, I brought the financial records, and I brought a statement from a forensic accountant documenting the $340,000 in transfers. The detective I spoke with, a different one this time, a man named something I always forget because I was too focused on his notepad, listened for 2 hours without interrupting me. They arrested my husband 4 days later, at his office, in front of his colleagues. The charges were attempted poisoning, because they found the purchase record for the GHB traced to a cash transaction at a supplement distributor in Indiana, and financial fraud. There would be more charges eventually, the DA told Heloise, related to the unauthorized transfers and the forged authorization on one of the Delaware filings. He called me from the county jail the night he was arrested. I let it go to voicemail. My mother-in-law called me from the hospital the next morning. She had been told, by that point, what the toxicology report showed. And she had been told, by the detective, not by me, that the glass had originally been intended for me. She was quiet for a long time on the phone. "I never treated you well," she finally said. "No," I said, "you didn't." Another silence. Is my granddaughter okay?" "She's fine," I said. "She doesn't know anything yet. She thinks Grandma got sick at the party." "That's good." Her voice had gone very small. "That's good." I didn't know what to feel for her. I still don't. She was never kind to me. She also almost died because of her own son. And she didn't know that when she raised her glass and drank. Neither of us chose the role we ended up playing that night. The divorce was finalized 7 months later. Because of the criminal charges and the documented fraud, his claim on Halcyon Diagnostics was thrown out entirely. Illinois courts do not look favorably on a spouse who attempts to poison you and simultaneously embezzle marital assets. The house went to me. Primary custody went to me. The settlement he'd been banking on, the one that would have funded a new life in Scottsdale, never materialized. I know there are people who think I should have done something different with that glass at the Fairmont, knocked it over, poured it into a plant, called the police right then, in the ballroom, in front of everyone. I've read the questions. I understand why people ask. All I can tell you is that, in the moment, I didn't know what I'd seen. I knew something was wrong. I didn't know it was poison. And by the time his mother drank from the glass, the decision was already made in ways I didn't fully control. I have to live with that. I do live with it. What I won't live with, what I refuse to accept, was sitting quietly in a burning house and pretending everything was fine. I built something from nothing once. I knew how to build again. My daughter started 4th grade this fall. Her school is 3 blocks from our house, and some mornings when the weather is good, we walk. She holds my hand for about half a block and then lets go because she's almost 10, and almost 10 means you don't hold your mom's hand on the street apparently. I let her go. I watch her walk ahead of me in the September light, her backpack swinging, already talking to the neighbor's kid who meets us at the corner. I have never been less afraid of anything in my life. There's a version of that night I used to replay where I do everything differently. I knock the glass over. I make a scene. I say, right there in the ballroom of the Fairmont with 30 people watching, I saw what you just did. I used to think that version of me was braver. I don't think that anymore. What I know now, after everything, after the arrest and the depositions and the long quiet months of rebuilding, is that courage doesn't always look like confrontation. Sometimes it looks like keeping your face still while your whole world is shifting underneath you. Sometimes it looks like driving home alone at midnight and sitting in your kitchen with your coat on, choosing to think instead of react. My husband counted on panic. That was the whole design of it. That I would be too frightened, too overwhelmed, too much in love with the life we'd built to look clearly at what was actually in front of me. He'd been moving money for over a year. He had a lawyer, a plan, a woman in Scottsdale. He had mapped out my destruction carefully and quietly, the way you do when you believe the other person will never look too closely. He miscalculated one thing. I had spent 11 years building something from nothing. I knew how to look closely. I did it every single day. I think about what actually saved me, and it wasn't luck. It was something I'd had to grow slowly, the hard way, the ability to stay honest with myself even when honesty was uncomfortable. To look at the numbers and believe what they told me. To look at a man I'd shared a bed with for a decade and believe what he was telling me, even when he was telling me with his body language and his second phone and a glass of champagne he handed me with a smile. Integrity isn't only about how you treat other people. It's about whether you're willing to see the truth when it's inconvenient. And then there was the matter of thinking clearly under pressure. Helly's used to say I had a clinical mind. She meant it as a compliment, I think, though I spent years wishing I was warmer, more instinctive. It turned out that the same part of me that could build a diagnostics company from a spare bedroom and a prayer was the part that could sit across a dinner table from a man who'd tried to poison me and pass the salad without blinking. I'm not proud of every moment of those weeks, but I'm grateful that I didn't let fear make my decisions for me. The thing I come back to most, though, is simpler than strategy. It's the fact that I didn't quit. Not when I found the Delaware LLC. Not when I saw the name of the woman in Scottsdale. Not during the months of waiting, of pretending, of holding everything together for my daughter while the legal process moved at its own pace. There were mornings I sat in my car in the school parking lot after drop-off and just breathed for 5 minutes before I could face the day. Nobody saw that part. But it was part of it too. What happened to my husband happened because actions have weight. Not in any mystical sense, just in the plain practical sense that choices compound over time, and 14 months of financial fraud and 1 night of attempted poisoning will eventually produce a specific and unavoidable outcome. The same is true in reverse. 11 years of honest work, of showing up, of building something real, that produced an outcome too. My daughter doesn't know the full story yet. Someday she will. When she's old enough, I'll tell her. The world will sometimes ask you to be smaller than you are, to doubt yourself, to look away, to accept less than you've earned. And the only real answer to that is to know yourself clearly enough that no one else's version of you can take root. That's what I'm still learning. That's what I'll spend the rest of my life practicing.